Hi, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Monday, February 23rd, 2026. Your car has a lot to say about who you are. Homo mobiles is not just a photography book about cool cars. The phrase is Latin for mobile human. This project by Dutch photographer Martin Romers depicts all kinds of vehicles, cars like of the likes of which you've probably never seen before. Including one with gardens sprouting from its roof, along with animal transport and bicycles. And Romers is not just looking for visual details. He uses vehicles as a vehicle for philosophical questions. How do our methods of transportation represent our identities, reflect global inequalities, and illustrate the changing nature of mobility as we move forward the 21st century? Romer spent nearly 5 years on this project, visiting 8 countries in 4 continents and photographing around 200 cars and other vehicles. 160 of these found their way into the book. He identifies the owners by first name only. In an interview over a Zoom call from his home in the Netherlands, he shares his thoughts on the project with NPR, his 9th book of photography. This interview has been edited for length and clarity. Tell us about the car you chose for the cover of the book. In 2019, on a trip to Mumbai, India, my wife and I passed by a carpet shop as we made our way from our hotel to a cafe for breakfast. In front of this shop was an old black car. We often forget how cars aren't just to get us from point A to point B. In many countries like India and China, they're precious real estate space. This particular car was riveting because it was more than a car. It was a statement. Like a billboard, it had Afghan carpets emblazoned on it, advertising the store. It made me think about how many ingenious ways in which people use their vehicles. I strongly believe that the spirit of the car reflects that of its owner or its driver. It says something about the culture they come from, their worldview identity, and even about society itself. Suresh, a climate activist, believes all cars should have rooftop gardens to counteract pollution. He lives in Bengaluru, India. Can you give us an example of what you mean? In Bangalore, now called Bengaluru, I saw a car parked on the street. It had a little garden on its roof. It was filled with sprouting grass and wild plants. When we located the driver, the owner, we learned that he was a lawyer. He was also a climate activist who believed that people should reduce their carbon footprint. So he wanted to convey that message through his car. He told me you can grow plants on any kind of vehicle and that he waters his garden every day. What inspired the idea? The particular project explores the relationship between vehicles and their owners. The idea for the book came to me in 2015 when I was working on a project called Metropolis, documenting life in the world's largest cities. My aim was to capture the energy and life in bustling urban environments. I saw cars everywhere, including some truly unusual vehicles I'd never seen before. They were an integral part of an urban environment, but I wondered if I isolated them, plucked them off the road so that they could focus solely on the vehicle as an object. What stories would that tell? That must have required extensive preparation. There was a lot to organize. I needed permission from the car owners to be able to photograph their vehicles in a studio-like setting. We asked the owners to bring their cars to the spot we picked, and we rented a van to lug around a 12-meter-long steel poles over which we would hang the white backdrop, and we needed people to help set all this up. Why was this style of photography important to you? In its natural settings, on a road with traffic, the background can be chaotic. When you place the car against a white backdrop, there are no distractions. You can focus solely on the vehicle and the people who own it. Which countries did the project cover? I included Germany because it's the biggest car producer in Europe, the Netherlands because that's home for me. I chose Senegal because like other West African countries, they import a lot of old cars from Europe. Cars that wouldn't pass inspection there anymore, but are now on the streets. Senegal has a growing middle class as well, and that is represented in the sheer diversity of cars you see on the road. Moore drives this minibus in Seagull-Thion, Senegal. I love the shot of the newspaper vendor and the bicycle he uses to sell papers in Senegal. What's his story? He's really amazing. He's an artist, and you can tell, because he's really making a fashion statement. He also has to make a living, and so that's where the newspaper cart hitched to a bicycle comes in. In Senegal, especially in urban areas like Dakar, newspapers are often sold by street vendors who may use small mobile kiosks, stands, or simply carry them by hand to offer to drivers and pedestrians. You also photographed in North America. I spent a lot of time in the US, especially in Los Angeles. There are people from the unhoused, homeless community for whom the car doubles up as a home. These are people from all walks of life. I met an artist who lives in a camper van, an immigrant from Mexico, a retired construction worker who was living in his car for 3 years. Juan, an immigrant from Mexico who lives in a camper in Santa Monica, California. There are a couple of unusual images that you took in China of men on motorized cargo bikes. They look like tricycles that are hitched to carriers and piled high with stuff. Can you tell me about those vehicles and their owners? Qin Fang and grandson in a Fuju electric vehicle in Shanghai, China. Those are electric vehicles, by the way. China is much more advanced in terms of EVs and much farther along in electrification than any other part of the world. And these were vehicles I'd never seen before. They're both the same type of vehicle, but I was struck by how they were used for very different purposes. In one, we see a guy selling children's toys on a street in a park. It looked lovely, so full of color and life. And in a stark contrast, in the second image, another man uses the same kind of vehicle, but this time it's piled high with all kinds of recycling junk. It reminds me of how vehicles can often be ingeniously repurposed. Like Sunny, a chicken vendor, who in the Nashik, Maharashtra, a western Indian state, who transformed his auto into a cage-holding mobile market stand. If someone wants a chicken, he will slaughter it afresh right there. Sunny's vehicle enables him to earn money as a chicken vendor. In China, you've taken images of electric autos and their drivers. Yes, I found them interesting. These taxi drivers cannot afford big cars. They use these inexpensive vehicles that were originally designed for people with disabilities and for wheelchair users. But today, anyone can hop on. It's interesting how vehicles adapt to social and economic needs. You mentioned how cars are often associated with new beginnings and spirituality in some parts of the world. It struck me how cars are tied to sentiment and spirituality, especially in India. I spent some time at a BMW dealership in Bengaluru. The car salesman told me that some clients hire a priest to do pujas, Hindu prayers that involve chanting, right in the showroom. When the client comes to pick up a new car, it's not something I've seen anywhere else in the world. In China, when you pick up a new car, it can be decked out in flowers. To celebrate a new car is like a rite of passage. The priest Nagabhushna chants prayers to protect a new car from misfortune and accidents in Bengaluru, India. You have pictures of big families lining up in front of their cars in India. Yes, I like to portray the human element in car portraits. I have photographed a family of 4 and another with 6 members along with their cars. In one picture, there are 12 people. To me, I definitely felt that cars in this context represented a sense of community, of family bonding. Sometimes it's about friendship too. When I was taking a picture of a truck and its driver in Malgyan in the western India state of Maharashtra, I spotted some kids laughing and returning home from school on bicycles. They agreed to be photographed alongside the truck. I invited them to join because they add another layer of mobility to the portrait. You have photographed the hand-pulled carts, many which are banned in some Indian cities. I noticed it the last time I was in Kolkata in 2008. There were many more of these hand-pulled rickshaws, and now there are less. The city wanted to get rid of it. It was controversial, a relic of colonial times. It also represented India's caste system. The people who pulled these carts to make a living were from a lower caste, but the people there ferried around were from a higher caste. It made me think about how these systems resist change, and that says something about society. That's why I focused on these vehicles. To me, it represented a unique part of the city's heritage and a livelihood for many, though they are gradually being phased out for modern alternatives, like auto rickshaws and e-rickshaws. And there are plenty of modern cars too. I photographed students at the university in the Netherlands who had developed a hydrogen car. We may have invented the wheel, but I wanted my book to show how transport is constantly evolving. It's rich, layered with culture and meaning, an entire spectrum. The book concludes with images of scrapped vehicles. Why was it important to depict the end of the life of a car? Shredded cars in the Netherlands. A car can be a big deal for some. It can play a huge role in our lives. It can mean a lot to them personally and culturally. But at the end of the day, in spite of its significance, I wanted to show how it's just a hunk of metal. The Department of Homeland Security in September 2025 said that 2 million undocumented immigrants have been forced out of the United States since the start of Donald Trump's second presidency. Racial profiling by ICE agents mirrors the targeting of the Japanese Americans during World War II. Through its use of the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime law from 1978, the Trump administration has bypassed immigration courts and the right to due process to more easily detain and deport immigrants. The Trump administration has, in part, reached these numbers by arresting immigrants in courthouses and at their workplaces. It has also conducted raids in schools, hospitals, and places of worship. And the Supreme Court in September, in its Noam v. Vasquez Perdomo decision, lifted a federal court order that barred agents with immigration and customs enforcement from racially profiling suspected and undocumented immigrants. For now, ICE agents can use race, ethnicity, language, and occupation as grounds for stopping and questioning people. This form of targeting has disproportionately affected Latino communities, which represent 9 in 10 ICE arrests, according to a UCLA study published in October. Targeting immigrants is centuries-old American practice. In particular, Asian Americans have drawn parallels between the attacks on Latinos today and the forced relocation and incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. Notably, the passage of the War Brides Act, passed just 3 months after the end of World War II, in December 1945, broke with nation's centuries-long practice of exclusionary immigration policy. The act allowed American servicemen to bring their non-American spouses and children to the United States. The measure seemed to inaugurate a new era of inclusive immigration policy. As a feminist studies scholar and author, I know the War Brides Act forever altered the nation's racial demographics, increasing both Asian migration to the U.S. and the birth of biracial children. On the 80th anniversary of the War Brides Act, I've also noticed an alarming contradiction. Although America may be more multiracial than ever before, the U.S. immigration system remains as exclusive as it has ever been. Exclusionary immigration policy. The racial profiling of Latino people by ICE agents today is not unlike what took place during World War II in the U.S. Following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued an executive order authorizing the forced removal of anyone deemed to be a national security threat, anyone, that is, who is Japanese, from 1942 to 1945. The U.S. government incarcerated approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps. To determine who was nationally a national security threat, the government used overt racial profiling, similar to today when the U.S. government often misidentifies Latino Americans as non-citizens. A majority of the Japanese people incarcerated in World War II were U.S. citizens. Amid the Trump administration's treatment of immigrants, it's worth recalling the exclusionary origins of U.S. immigration policy. The first restrictive immigration law in the U.S., the Page Act of 1875, barred Chinese women from entering the country. The assumption the law was based was that all Chinese women were immoral and worked in sex trade. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents conduct operations in the predominantly Mexican American community in Chicago on November 8th, 2025. Jack Boksari. The Page Act laid the groundwork for the Chinese Exclusion Act. By 1882, which banned all Chinese immigration into the U.S. for 10 years, which was the first federal law to ban an entire ethnic group, launching an era of legalized and targeted exclusion. With the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924, the U.S. created its first border control service, which enforced new immigration restrictions. It also implemented a quota system, which banned or limited the number of Americans from specific regions, including Asia, Southern and Eastern Europe. The act stemmed from nativism, the policy that protects the interests of native-born residents against those of immigrants, and desired to preserve American homogeneity. The 1945 War Brides Act largely diverged from these previous measures, helping dismantle the Asian exclusion made commonplace in the 19th and 20th centuries. From 1945 until 1948, when the War Brides Act expired, more than 300,000 people entered the country as non-quota immigrants, people from countries not subject to federal immigration restrictions. Exclusionary tendencies. Decades later, in 1965, the U.S. formally abolished the quota system. America opened its doors to those who President Lyndon B. Johnson deemed most able to attribute to the nation's growth, particularly skilled professionals. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 eliminated racial exclusion. As a result, the U.S. population diversified. Immigrants deepened the multiracialism, initiated the War Brides Act. This trend increased later in the 1960s when the Supreme Court in Loving v. Virginia overturned anti-miscegenation laws, which criminalized marriage between people of different races. The justice rules that banning interracial marriage violated the 14th Amendment. Multiracialism further increased after the Vietnam War. Subsequent legislation, such as the 1987 Amerasian Homecoming Act, facilitated by the entry of biracial children born in Vietnam and fathered by a U.S. citizen. People of Japanese ancestry arrived at the Santa Anita Assembly Center in California before being moved inland to relocation centers on April 5, 1942. By the 1960s, however, exclusion was taking on different shape. After 1965, immigration policy initiated a preference system that prioritized skilled workers and relatives of U.S. citizens. Quotas related to race and national origin were abolished. Nonetheless, preferences for families and professionals excluded people from Latin America. For the first time, immigration from the Western Hemisphere was limited. This directly affected migrant workers in the farming and agricultural industries, many of whom were Latino. Recalling the War Brides Act allows Americans to better comprehend that fiction that undergirds the U.S. immigration system, that immigration's policy preference for certain immigrants is enough to justify the discriminatory policies which deem some families more valuable than others.
We breathe all the time without a second thought, but we can all harness the power of the breath to help change the way we think and feel. Controlling our breath can help us feel less stressed and can even increase our cognitive skills. The best thing about it is it's easy to do anywhere. So why does it work? The reason it's so effective is because deep breaths calm down our nervous system. When we hold our breath due to stress, carbon dioxide increases and we produce the hormone noradrenaline, which makes us feel distracted and stressed. Recall a time when you were frightened or in pain. Your breathing probably increased as a result, which can also increase feelings of panic. But if we breathe in slowly and deeply, it counteracts this. This simple process pumps more oxygen into your body and brain, which slows down your heart rate, lowers your blood pressure, and reduces your stress and anxiety. It can even help reduce feelings of pain, which is why women are encouraged to take deep breaths during childbirth. When we're in pain, it increases stress, but focusing on the breath can lower stress, which desensitizes the body's response to pain signals. It's why breathing exercises form a core part of many meditation practices. Deep breaths are beneficial for the brain too, and can improve decision-making. In one study, participants who practiced 2 minutes of deep breathing before a task showed lower perceived stress and improved decision-making on a task by as much as 50%. And if, like me, you've ever lain awake for long periods at night and find your mind is too active to get back to sleep, doing a breathing exercise can help. You can try it now. Breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 6. Repeat it a few times and notice the effect it has.